Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Denise Thomas, COO of Cisco Meraki, creating intuitive technologies to optimize experiences, secure locations, and seamlessly connect people, places, and things. Denise, I'm so excited to chat with you as we were talking before the show about the history of Cisco Meraki, the transition and acquisition, and kind of everything that encompasses a lot of what people don't know when merging two kind of really exciting technology companies together and then continuing the culture and organization of it. I know you had a front row seat to it and we're integral in the transition, and I'd love to dive into that. Before we get into all that, a question that always pops into my head is, what are larger companies doing better or more efficiently or more effectively than smaller companies in your experience and in your opinion as well?
That's a great question. I think just by virtue of being larger, you have access to a much larger pool of talent. You have access to a lot of ideas. A lot of large companies tend to be global. And it's really interesting the problems you are trying to solve on behalf of your customers when that's the reach that your employee base has. And sometimes I think, as I think about our evolution inside of Cisco and even just a little bit prior to Cisco, because I was a part of Meraki a little bit before that, kind of the problems that we were solving and who we were solving them for was much smaller when we were much smaller. And I think the problems get exponentially more complicated and I think that's some of the benefits of being a larger organization. You're being asked to solve networking challenges for a small organization or a small company at San Francisco. And you're also being asked to solve for networking challenges for a multinational NGO or a multinational company. And when you can get good at that, that is amazing, because the impact that you can have on people and companies is just much greater. And so I think that's what larger companies, when they're doing it right, are doing better, because they just have a broader set of customers that they need to be supporting and being in partnership with.
Yeah. And what are some of the signals to show that a company is doing that well? Is it the structure of it? Is it the speed? Is it the strategies that you deploy? What in particular leads you to being able to cater to such a, I guess, completely different kind of companies and profiles and types of organizations? I'm assuming within those, there's a lot of intricacies, but how do you kind of keep a consistent experience as your company matures?
Here's a part that I think smaller companies do really well. Staying really close to the customer. And not only understanding the problems that they're trying to solve, but being in partnership with them on those solutions. And I think that to me is the canary in the mine, is when you stop listening to your customers, when you stop allowing the things that they're trying to solve for to guide what you build and who you invite into your company to build it. I think that's it. And that becomes really also something that's hard to do when you get bigger, is to make sure that feedback loop comes back to your business. We're lucky in the sense of how we operate inside of Cisco. We have almost a closed loop where our support team takes a support call from a customer, and then they have a relationship with our engineering team. And our engineering team then consumes some of the feedback that our customers had and the experience that they're having, and they're building better product. And it's almost like a virtuous cycle. We have a sales team that sits really connected to our support team. And they're hearing from our seller, as is our engineering team, on kind of what our customers are asking for and what feels important to them. And then we have this thing with Make-A-Wish. Our customers can actually literally say, hey, this is the thing that we really want you to build, and they can submit it. And it doesn't go to a hole that nobody ever looks at. It's a part of our engineering motion to look at those wishes and try to figure out which of those will drive the biggest impact for the most customers. And then we build for that. Having a loop where you're constantly touching base with the people that you're in business to support and to serve is a fundamental part of that equation. And I think sometimes when you get bigger, you start going, well, what did I say that I was going to deliver to Wall Street? Or what products do I have, and how am I bundling them up in order to drive sales and revenue in the market? And that only goes so far. I think you can kind of look at, history is littered with companies that fell into that hole and couldn't get themselves out. But if you stay really close to the customer and you have real mechanisms for listening and reacting and allowing that feedback from our customers to drive what we build and how we build it, I think it's easier to become not only a market leader, but to stay a market leader into perpetuity as long as those feedback loops are really still happening. And I think what typically happens is that they stop happening.
Yeah.
And you stop being relevant to the folks that you said you were in the business to serve.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by that transition and the whole kind of the structure of it. A lot of companies, when they go through acquisitions or like an acqui-hire, kind of bringing that team in and kind of having that unit assembled and already together, it does get cut off a lot. And as a company maybe going through a similar partnership or acquisition, whatever you want to call it, or however it's fine, how do you advocate to keep that structure and keep that loop and not get too integrated into the larger company? Is that something that the acquirer sets up expectation-wise, something that the founders do when they're going through these discussions? How do you maintain that'll be the environment? And because it's led to so much success and you want to repeat that, but with more resources, how do you maintain that? Who's advocating for it?
I mean, I think the founders on day one in the conversation that they have with anyone that is acquiring them are the biggest advocates for that. I think when we first joined Cisco and our founders were saying, you bought us for a reason. You ran some numbers and you assumed that we were going to be able to deliver our bookings and revenue and growth and innovation. And we think we can deliver it in a way that is faster and better than even your plan. But here are some key components of what is going to allow us to be successful and how might we build an acquisition strategy around those key components. It's not everything, but it's the things that matter most. And for us in Meraki, it was around keeping this customer centricity as a part of how we work, making sure that the pieces that delivered on the customer experience were continuously connected. And it was like building on the culture of like winning and innovation that we had built as an organization. And we really wanted to be able to do the things that allowed us to nurture that culture and that talent base in the way that we thought would allow us to get to the commitments that Cisco had wanted for us to deliver. So I think all of those things have to kind of sit at the core. What matters most to driving your customer and your team outcomes, and making sure that when you show up in that acquisition conversation, that you show up and ask for the things that you need. And I know, like, I talked to other friends that have kind of gone through this process with other larger companies that are acquiring them. And you may not get it into perpetuity, but you can kind of set up and say, hey, I want to ring fence this for this amount of time. This is what I think we'll need. And I think sometimes founders are afraid to do that because they're like, well, do I have the leverage? Do I have the power? Depending on like how large their company is or whether or not they are already like profitable or they already like they're like, oh, well, can I ask for these things? I mean, you can always ask. As long as you're clear on what really matters. As long as you're clear on what really matters.
In this transition, what was the employee's reaction? I'm always curious on how do you communicate a very big transition, for lack of a better word, big transition into the structure and the organization, even the workflow of the company to your employees, and how do you maintain that trust with the employees that things will maintain the same and the promises or the expectations for their development will remain within that transition to a larger company? What was that reaction, and how did you kind of slowly transition them into this organization to still be kind of running at full capacity?
I think our founders did a really great job of selling the opportunity. Right. Yeah. I think there was like a moment, I can't remember exactly how the conversation happened, but our founder at the time like made reference on a very visual thing to us. They said, there's a container ship and it's out in the bay, and today it might have like one container in it that has our product in it. And we do the thing that we know that we're capable of doing, and we drive the value that we know we can drive to our customers by bringing cloud management to something that had been really difficult to do before. There could be a whole container ship filled with our goods. There could be a device in every network in the world that we build and that we connect. And I think that being a part of the market leader in networking and security is only going to allow us to get to that end state sooner than if we tried to go at it alone.
Yeah.
And when you sell the opportunity to your team and you recognize like, hey, there's like a moment of sadness, right? Like my boss at the time when Meraki was acquired, she was like, I know this is not what you came here to do. You came here to build a company. You came here to do this thing. You had already worked at big companies and you were like, hey, I think I want something different than that.
Yeah.
But like, hey, can you hang out for 6 months so that way we can kind of get through this acquisition motion and get the things set up and all of these things. And she has already done many things, taken the company public, and still sitting here growing this business. But I think that there is a path that you can bring people on if you can remind them of what you set out to do, and assuming that the acquirer or the partner that you have gets you to that faster. Those mission-driven folks that you hired that had a view and a promise of what you were going to do to change the world or change your industry or whatever, like they believe that mission, hopefully.
Yeah.
And if you can help them see how you can get to that faster, better, have broader impact, I think you can take people through that moment. But you have to be really, you as a founder, you have to be on mission and you have to communicate in a way that people understand how we're going to get closer to that as a part of being a part of this new thing versus kind of trying to do it the way we were doing it before.
Yeah. If you were to give any founder advice who's going through this transition, say has employees who don't want to transition into the new structure or organization, how do you manage that conversation? It might be a little bit of tension, some friction. How do you clearly communicate or set expectations or just overall alleviate some of the challenges for employees who say, hey, I see the direction you guys want to go. For my career, I want to go a different direction. How can we make this kind of split between the organization and my career? How do you go through those conversations and what advice would you give founders who are going through that transition?
Well, what I would give founders, the first piece of advice is like, if these folks are really critical for the next 6 to 12 months of your organization's growth, write that into your deal. Like make sure you make it, give them the money, like whatever feels meaningful to them to like hang out to bring you through this transition point. Are these folks maybe that are going to grow with your organization or this new company into perpetuity? Maybe not. But like, I think a lot of people are like, well, if this is not for you, then, maybe it's time for you. Like, maybe this is where we part ways. And I'm like, if they're critical to your success in this new organization, like, don't give up the fight so early. And for most people, you can buy a little bit more time if you put a little bit more money on the table. So that's the first thing. But then the second part of it is like, you got to just acknowledge that things are not for everyone. And I remember we had a sales leader and we thought he was super critical to what we were going to do. And we did the things. We said, hey, this is what we have for you if you stay. And he said, I remember this conversation really clearly. He said to me, Denise, I have been on this journey before. I know what the journey from $100 million to $500 million looks like. And it's a hell of a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I also know what the journey from $500 million to $1 billion and he's like, that's just not for me. Like, it's not who I am and it's not how I'm wired. And it's not the place that I'm in flow or I get joy out of work. And you got to honor that for folks and say, okay, I get it. Like, and if that's the case, then I guess like we kind of part ways and we assume that you never know when people might come back and realize that the problem that you're trying to still work on is something that is still interesting to them, even if your scale might have changed. But you have to kind of know that on this journey of building a company, not everyone's going to come along with you the entire way, but you also have to, do the things that you need to do to keep people as long as, you need to keep them, especially in a situation where folks don't really feel like that long game is the one that they want to be in with you anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. It's awesome to hear the respectfulness that you might have for someone that may not work out, but also, championing for the people that kind of will make the transition that much more successful and just being an advocate for what they want and versus what's beneficial for the company. And it must be a hard kind of balance I think this next question is a little bit of a cheating question, but I'm curious to hear your answer. Thinking about kind of this whole high growth startup stage, I think there's a lot of buzzwords in what that may entail, but is there a playbook or is there a set of systems that you put in place as a COO to operate or get to operating a company that is in high growth stage? And define high growth for us. Is that increasing in the amount of revenue? Is that increasing the amount of employee count? Is that a certain funding round? How would you define high growth? And then what are the systems that allow you to operate at that high level?
I mean, I would look at what probably feels taxing to an organization is to grow like 30% plus, like call it bookings, and you can also throw employee count in there. Like, when you start to grow that fast, what I find happens is like the way that you used to operate, like every time you double, you need a new way of operating. And so at 30%, like you start having to have a new way of operating when you look at it from a compounded perspective, like very quickly and very often, often like the point where you just finally settle in your new operating model and then you got to change it all over again because you added on. So that's kind of how I would define high growth. And in those periods of high growth, I think you've got to be able to do things. You do a couple of things. You have to be able to be very clear and plain spoken about what your direction and what your value to your customers is. Like I see a lot of organizations that show up in the PowerPoints and they're like, and I'm like, well, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And they go into this long story about what they're trying to solve. And I think to myself, well, if you're a high growth company and you take that many words to tell me like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? What I know is that inside of your organization, there are a lot of people that don't know what the hell you're doing. Or it's like, why you're doing it or whatever. Because like, if you're growing that fast, it needs to be as clean as what I stated in the beginning. There's a container ship and and we know that if I give you networking equipment or networking experience that, is easy to deploy, drives high value, and is cloud enabled, I can change the world. And you tell people that, and they go, okay, I get it. I know what we're doing, and I didn't need 10,000 slides or whatever. So in a high growth environment, like being very clear on why you're here, what the problem is that you're trying to solve, and how, like, what is the value, the 2 or 3 value items that allow you to solve that problem better than the competitors in the market.
Yeah.
And then the second thing that I think you need is like, you need a way to keep the organization aligned. When it's smaller, it could just be a handful of people sitting in a room, and every week they're looking at the business and they're coming back out and letting people know where we're going and why, and they're fully aligned. I think that's a mechanism that can happen when you're small and you're high growth. When you get bigger, you have to be like, okay, I got layers of leadership to go through. What is the motion I'm going to use? Is it OKRs? Is it this? Is it this other thing? Is it? And then you also then have to layer on a communication back to your employees that allow that to happen, and a way to get feedback back from your employees to make sure that like we really are aligned and we're really all moving in the same direction. And then the third thing, like Julian, I believe strongly that you create the team. And if you build the right team in the right company, you can solve different customer problems over time as your business grows, especially if it's growing really quickly. And I've seen the power of team at Meraki, where we have grown a business very quickly, and we hired some really great people that could grow along with it. And we articulated, and we continue and came back to articulating our culture every time we needed to change it in order to meet the needs and the stage of the business that we were in. We didn't set it and forget it on the team. We didn't set it and forget it on the culture. We took the culture along in the journey, because it is how you actually build product. It is how you actually stay relevant in the market. You got to have a strong team. You got to have a team that really wants to be working together in the direction that you're going in. And if you don't do that well and you don't nurture that, you cannot do high growth. Like, there are people that, like, it means something to be a Merakian. Like, they bleed green. Like, that's their color. And whether they work here today or they don't, when they come back and they talk about the experience of working here, they talk about the energy and the impact and the fun that we had delivering on our customer and team outcomes. And if you're growing super fast, you need that. People cannot be in this thing if they don't trust each other. They cannot be in this thing together when a lot of stuff is going to be ambiguous if they don't rely on each other. They're not going to create magic if they don't feel like they're in a thing together that aligns with who they are as a person and what's important to them. And I think that's sometimes easier to do when you're smaller, because you're like, oh, I hired all these people, I know them. Like, if you grow 30% or 100%, and 5 seconds later you turn around, you don't know these people anymore. And if you haven't built the type of things in your organization to keep your culture strong, you dilute one of the most powerful parts of moving quickly, which is team.
Yeah. How does hiring change as you continue to grow? And I'm assuming the interview process changes. Maybe even the type of individual you're hiring changes. I'm assuming you're trying to keep the values consistent and people aligned, but how does the hiring change, and what should leadership consider as they grow and scale in terms of the type of person that they're bringing on to the company?
Again, I always start with, well, what are we trying to solve at the stage of the business that we are? And let's make sure that we're really clear the types of capabilities someone has to have in order to be able to deliver that. But from a process perspective, what I've seen as we have grown is we've really implemented things like structured interviewing, where we sit down and we say, hey, what does this job need to drive? And what are the capabilities that this person needs to be able to come to the table with or grow into, or like several different categories. And when we do the interview process, we really lean into that structured interview process, because it allows for, bias to come out of the system a bit. It allows for companies to really solve for a diverse talent base. I come back to the same thing. Like, if we're really trying to grow 30% year over year plus, I need the wisdom of the crowd to do that. And if my crowd looks exactly the same, I'm going to get more wisdom if it doesn't, especially if I'm trying to grow a global business serving markets or a host of different types of customers. And so our structured interview process really helps drive that through for us. And the most important part of that, obviously, is the questions in the interview. But a special sauce in it to me is the debrief. Like, how do we hold ourselves accountable for saying, this is what we said we were looking for, and this is the person, and this is kind of the skills that they were able to demonstrate in this process, and do we have the right person matched to this role?
Yeah.
And that's one thing. And then we have also spent a lot of time building a really effective talent brand that talks to the market about what we are about, who we are as a team, what we value. And that's a really great place for people to begin. They go, hey, does this resonate with me? And it's that's a part of that journey. By the time that they get to your interview process, they're bought into who you are as a team and they want to be a part of that. And I think sometimes people forget that. They throw up a website and they're like, oh, it looks like everybody else's website or whatever. And I'm like, you have an opportunity to tell a compelling story about what stage of growth are you in and what are you looking for and why aren't you using that? So we really started to rely on our talent brand sort of in this mid journey that we have been on. And it really made a difference in how the talent that came to us, people that were excited about the stage of growth that we were in, we were getting those folks coming. But who you hire changes. We have a lot of generalists, myself included, where my boss was like, I don't know, you know exactly what I was looking for, but you can do a lot of things. All right, come. Let's do this thing together, right? And you hire a lot of that in the beginning, and that's great because there's a lot of stuff to do, and you gotta get people that have the capabilities maybe to do a lot of things kind of well, because that's the pace of which you're operating. And then you have to realize when you've met and kind of gotten to a transition point, where you may start to need to go really deep in a particular area, and then you have to start to hire differently. And I think some people get caught. They keep hiring the generalist, and we have moved into a specialist moment in some parts of the organization, not in all of them. And they keep hiring into that profile of oh, I've got a jack of all trades, I've got a utility player. And I was like, you always need them in an organization. Where you need them, when you need them, those things change as you kind of go along with the size and the scope of the organization. So that was a long way to answer your question. And I think that's kind of some of the things that we thought about along the way.
Yeah. And one thing I'm always curious about, thinking about culture and thinking about as companies grow, is how do you, consider or push initiatives where you're hiring people who aren't, there's a big stereotype of the type of tech professional. And I think we all might know that, cisgender, non-BIPOC kind of individuals. How do you, as in leadership, kind of push and be consistent about an initiative of bringing diverse people or employees into a growing organization when it's when it's traditionally very difficult not only to assess the talent, but also their representation through their experience seems a little less, I guess, linear as some of the other applicants that you might be seeing. What are some ways that you really push for diversity and inclusion and hiring individuals who come from maybe not as linear backgrounds that traditionally other companies might hire from? How do you go about that?
And I work there, so and I have a resume that no recruiter would ever understand. But I think the thing I mentioned before, like being like the structured interviewing process, being really clear about what you are actually looking for and trying to disrupt your own pattern matching, right? I used to be like, oh, well, I like these types of people. And then I had to say to myself, well, what does it actually mean? Like, what is it about those folks that have made them successful in the organization? Like, let's talk about it in skills and capabilities as opposed to like a person like this. Then it's amazing what happens when you sit down and say, okay, what I'm looking for when I say a person like this is someone that has a growth mindset, someone that defaults to action. Like when I start to say those things, that becomes much easier to look, like take like a person through the equation and actually ask the types of questions that would help me understand whether or not they have these very clear capabilities that I'm looking for. That's one thing. I think that you just have to have a commitment from leadership. When we were on a journey at Meraki around our culture, we had a leader that wanted to build a place where people belonged. And he went and used the most powerful addresses that we had in our business at the time, sales kickoffs and AMAs. And he went in front of those folks when they expected him to be coming and be like, oh, we're selling this and we're selling this. And he drove messages and said, this is what is top of mind to me. And this is the right thing to do for our business. Like this will make our business stronger. And he changed the conversation and changed the commitment. And then the last thing I would say is that then you have to have a data-driven journey. Yeah. We did that. We looked at all of our data. We said, like, where are we not as strong? How can we build the types of structures and accountability points that allow us to kind of get to the outcome that we're looking for? And the collection of those things, like some of them are process-driven actions that you take, and you determine what processes you need by looking at your data and really partnering with consultants, which is what we did. We partnered with a data-driven consultancy called Paradigm, and they looked at all of our data and they really helped us map out a process to become a more inclusive place. We had leadership that was like, this is not an add-on. This is a core part of how we operate and the culture that we have. It is in our values that everybody is in. And then we moved forward with the grace and humility that we were not going to get it right every single time. And when we did it, we owned up to it, we fixed it, and we moved. Right. And creating a more inclusive space is not impossible, but it does require intention. And it requires that you believe that it is a critical part of your business strategy. And I think sometimes that's where we don't get it right in the tech world, is that people think it's an add-on. Like, oh, when I get my business right, I will. Or it's a nice to do because I'm a nice person or something. I mean, I've heard a whole bunch of But it's got to be integral. It's got to be supported by process and data-driven analysis. And then it's got to have leadership commitment where it's not additional. It's integral.
Yeah. It's almost like if I were to try to assemble a puzzle together without a picture. Without the picture, you don't know what you're aiming towards. But with the picture, you can at least start to bring the pieces together. And like you said, they might not match, but you kind of reiterate and improve during the process. Tell us a little bit about the traction of Cisco Meraki, and where's the company now? What's exciting about the previous year of growth, and what are you excited about this year? Where is the company going in terms of its direction?
I'm always excited about the first doing. I guess that's why I still work here. I sort of coming back to this conversation around customer. We're really seeing, and you can kind of see it regardless of whether you're talking about networking or security, like you're seeing sort of the transition in the power of the cloud. And when we started on this journey 10 years ago, I think people thought cloud networking was going to be like this little niche,
Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody would want to do that. They wouldn't want to put their very important, critical business infrastructure in the cloud. Like the world is like 100, like very different, 180 different, right? Like totally different, like floors thinking about the cloud differently. And I think we continue to have sort of leadership in cloud networking and IoT, and we are really positioned well to drive a platform strategy around that. I mean, we have core networking, but then we have IoT, and then we have kind of insights, and really we're able to deliver on this idea of intentional networking, where not just like, oh, is my network up, but like, what are my business objectives, and how is technology and data and insights and sometimes things like IoT allowing me to get to those business outcomes. And I think the power and the strength of our platform, it has never been better. And we're also sort of adding in pieces of Cisco's broader infrastructure into the Meraki dashboard. So we're bringing more of Cisco's powerful technology into a cloud environment, which is really exciting. Yeah. And like when you think about what's at play at Cisco and the power of the technologies that they have, and then if you can kind of drive it to infrastructure that's actually easier to deploy, easier to drive insights from, easier to deliver customer outcomes with, I get really excited about that. And I think that like a lot of people look at like a company like ours and they go, oh, well, it's infrastructure, it's this. And I'm like, no, it's enablement of the business outcomes that you have. And we can do it better, faster, and more effectively by virtue of the breadth of technology solutions that Cisco has. And so I get excited about that because the world is a platform play. Like iPhone is a platform, and it is like it. And like we are in the midst of the platform revolution. I think we're really positioned well for that. Yeah,
it's incredible to see how cloud, first of all, has become almost table stakes to running a business now. And as your company grows, the insight into how it's operating is even that much more crucial to knowing where you're going to go, what direction you should go. And the data piece, I completely agree. The more you know about how technology is affecting your business outcomes, the better you can prepare and strategize on how your business can move forward, and also where you currently are. If you're burning capital or if you're on a growth stage or whatever kind of initiative you're running, that really allows you to take on and be more, I guess, strategic intelligent about the way you're moving. What are some of the biggest risks that Cisco Meraki faces today?
I mean, I think it's the risk that anyone has. Like, do you have the right talent for the biggest problems that your business and your customer has? And I think that anybody that gets on this podcast, that probably should be the biggest risk that everybody has. Did I get the right people in the door that can solve for my next phase of growth or next opportunity that I have in my business? And we're constantly asking ourselves that question and making sure that if we have vehicles to grow the talent that we have, so that way they can be the right talent to answer the questions that our customers and our business has. And we have the right brand in the marketplace to continue to attract the highest caliber talent. So that's always the number one risk. The second thing I think is, I think that there is a risk of scale. There's always a risk of scale. Like the bigger you get, connecting these pieces gets a little bit more complex and requires the highest level of intention. Like there's that thing, like if you get 100 people, like your natural human connections break at 100 people. I think it's something, or 150 people. And then you have to do a lot of things in order to get that 160 or 200 people to kind of come back together. When you're talking about 2,000 people, 3,000 people, 10,000 people, like the level of intention that is required to keep those folks engaged, to keep those folks aligned, and to keep those folks delivering extraordinary outcomes is high. And it is always a risk. The bigger you get, the more you can do. And there is a risk of then narrowing down the things that you must do. And that is the risk of scale. Because if you're running a great business like we're running, like there are 1,000 things that you could dedicate your time and your priority to. Because there's always like, oh, I think we can grow $10 million here, or I think this is a $100 million opportunity, and da-da-da. But all of that comes at the risk of not doing something else, right?
Right.
And when you get larger, this act of pruning and focus is always a risk.
Both sides.
So I would say like, and so these things are not like today. They were the same things that we were worried about before, because I think if you're constantly looking at that, some of the other things they'll work their way out.
Sure.
Those big stuff downs. Like if you're like, okay, am I listening to my customers? Have I focused on the right things that I need to be focused on? Have I figured out a way to get all of the people in my organization, depending on how big they are, in touch with what our customers need and how we need to deliver on that? It's the biggest risk that businesses have. And when you see them fail, they failed on one of those dimensions. They stopped listening to the customer. They didn't have a way to stay customer first and connected. They didn't have a way to prune and focus, or they didn't have a way to continue to bring the best and the brightest and the most engaged to solve the problems at hand. And like, there's a gazillion business cases from Stanford and Harvard and all of the shenanigans that goes on in most places that basically are telling the same story. Bob looked out the window, Susan looked out the window, and like if you boil down the problem, it's one of those three things.
No, I 100% agree. And I guess I'm also curious on a personal note, is the same thing that inspired you to join Meraki still motivating you today? And if not, what's changed?
I still think that we are changing an industry. And I am a person that likes to change things.
Yeah.
So that continues to be a motivation for me. When I look back at my career, I have spent a lot of, like, the thing that like threads it is like, I believe in the power of engaged and creative and whole people to do amazing and incredible things. And I get really excited about bringing people together to solve hard problems and putting them on missions for themselves, right? And we're still doing that.
Yeah.
And because you're still doing that, I'm like, you're still speaking my love language, for lack of a better way of describing it. And I think that's what keeps people at a company. Like, it has to align with the values that you have and the things that get you out of bed in the morning, and building great teams and great businesses that are wanting to disrupt and to deliver better outcomes for their customers. What I wake up to do every day, and I getting to do that here. So it's the reason why I showed up. And I'm lucky. Like, I had a dinner with my peers last night, and I think I laughed so much that like I got home and like my jaws were a little tired. And like, we spend so much time at work, and if you're a founder and that's not the type of thing you're building, you're gonna have to pay people more. You're gonna have a lot of infrastructure around this thing in order to get people to care at the level that I see our leadership team caring for our business and for our team. And it's at that visceral level that we have built this business. It means something incredibly special to all of us. And I think that's why I keep showing up every day. Is because I have that level of care for the team and our customers.
I love that. I would like to ask this next question for selfish research purposes, but also for my audience. Whether it was early in your career or now, what books or people have influenced you the most?
I started my career, my first job out of college was to build a nonprofit. And so we got a little bit of seed money, like in this early movement, which was like venture capital, but for NGOs and social service organizations and community organizations and community organizing and stuff like that. So it's called the Echo and Green Foundation, which still exists today, which is amazing, turning out amazing organizations like City Year and Teach for America, and Jumpstart, and all these things. And I started my career there, working in communities to try to figure out how to inherent resources within the community can really change outcomes for young people. And I met a lot of amazing people. And one of the people I met was this community organizer. And then he went on, he was a politician and ended his career at MIT sort of as a professor there, but running an organization that allowed for people to come to MIT and learn and grow and then take those resources back to their communities. Yeah. And he continues to be a real source of inspiration to me because he's like, every time I was making a career change, he and I used to play tennis together when I lived in Boston. And every time I was making a career change, I'd go to him and go, well, what? And he was like, ask the question, well, what impact do you think you could have? And I would go, wow. I think it's like this. And then he'd be like, does that feel worthy of your time? Like, yeah. And we have these conversations. And it really set me up for saying, well, what kind of career do I want to have? Like, what kind of impact do I want to have? And it has guided me through my entire career. I don't make decisions on like, well, how much money can I make? Or blah, blah, blah. I go, well, what is the impact that I'm trying to have? And is this worthy of my time? And allows me to have that impact. And just the beginning of this year, this community organization that I helped to build, there were 2 young women in it that were rock stars when they were 16 and whatever. But like, one of them is now a city council member at large in the city of Boston. And one of them is now a state senator. And the city council member was holding I think it was a Bible, and the other young woman was being sworn in on it. When I think about what this journey is for me as a person and an executive or whatever, it's about the impact. Yeah. And in a corporate environment, it's the impact that we can have for our customers. And I have great stories at Meraki where our customers show up and say, I used to be able to do this. I can do this now. And it's a world of difference to me. And I showed up at Meraki because I worked at a school and I knew that if we could do technology in the way that Meraki would allow our head of IT to do, he could then turn around and really be focused on student outcomes as opposed to keeping a network up. Yeah. And I don't know, like I wake up every morning wanting impact. And so when I look at the people that matter to me or have guided my career, they are the people that fundamentally continue to ask that question to me. What is the impact that you're trying to have? And is this the thing that really keeps you in a place where you feel like you're driving as much of it as you can? We have a short number of years on the planet, and you want to leave it better than you found it. And it's probably not a conversation that a lot of people have when they're talking about their corporate career, but like, I love it when people get promoted. Yeah. I one day hope to work for some of the people that currently work for me. Like that's the game I'm in. But love that. As for books, I'm now reading this thing, 7 Rules of Power, because I'm trying to get more comfortable in this idea that you need some of that in order to get shit done. So I'm leaning into play for me, but when I think about the thing that has guided my career, I come back to milking every single day. What is the impact that you're trying to have? And is the thing that you are doing worthy enough of your time to drive that impact?
I love that. It's such a simple but a powerful question to ask yourself, and also answered, I guess, quote unquote, right, or answered in honesty. I feel like that's enough motivation to push past all the external things that you really can't control, because intrinsically you kind of have a compass. So thank you for sharing that. And I know we're at the end of our show, and I think we could talk hours on end about not only how you're structuring the business and running it, but also your story and your background and the experiences you've had. So we'll have to do something like a part 2 to this episode. But last little bit is I always like to give our guests a chance to tell us where we can learn more about your company and what you're doing, and even yourself. What are your plugs? Give us where we can learn more about Cisco Meraki, the websites, the LinkedIns, the Twitters. Where can we find you, and maybe even work with you in helping companies kind of have a more up-to-date and better cloud infrastructure?
We're lucky. You go to Google, Cisco Meraki, you'll find us. I think our Twitter handle is also Cisco Meraki. So lots of places on the social network to find us. And I do think that our website not only tells a great story about our talent, but it tells a great story about our business and has a lot of customer stories in it. And so folks can kind of hear not only what are we doing on behalf of our customers, but like, what's the type of team that's getting us there? So I would point people in that direction to learn a little bit more about us. But we Twitter, LinkedIn. I think we might even have TikTok, but I would not know because I'm not on TikTok. But I believe that too.
Amazing. Denise, it was so incredible to learn about your story, the company's transition, where it is now, what still inspires you. And I hope you enjoyed yourself on the show, but thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast.
Well, thanks, Julian, for having me. It's nice to, it was nice to take a step back and really think about these things as we were talking about them.
Amazing. Well, I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you again.